at Heart of the City. And during this session, you'll hear why net zero is important for business leaders, and you'll hear from a business leader who is going through the process. You'll hear from them firsthand, and throughout the session, please do add any questions to the chat function or the Q&A, and we will try and get to them at the end of the session. If we don't, we can follow up with you afterwards, so add away to those functions. But to start with, if we can just go on to a couple of slides, I'll just tell you a quick bit about Heart of the City. So we are a small charity. We've been running for over 20 years, and our purpose is to support small businesses to develop their responsible business and sustainability practices, programs, and strategies. We've helped well over 1,000 SMEs through our responsible business programs over the years, and more recently we've started to focus particularly on climate action for SMEs, and we've developed a course, Climate for SMEs, 4 Steps to Action, and a toolkit, which from our experience of working with SMEs, we know really practical support was needed, really practical, achievable ideas to measure your carbon footprint and start your journey to net zero. So that is what we have developed, and we hope it's really useful, and we're really pleased today to have the opportunity to tell you more about the course, more about the toolkit, but also just to talk to you and set the scene for why net zero is important. So I will start by handing over to my colleague Laura McCulloch, our net zero programme manager.
Thanks, Natalie. If we move on a few slides as well, please. So as Natalie said, I'm Net Zero Programme Manager at Heart of the City, and I look after all things net zero within our programmes. So I mostly help on the climate action course that you'll hear about later, so that I help SMEs with measuring their footprint and creating an action plan. So we're going to start off the session by setting the net zero scene. If we go on to the next slide, please. And I'll be starting off with going through some key terms in the net zero space, because it's really important when we're talking about the business benefits of net zero to actually understand firstly what net zero is. And also we'll be mentioning these 7 key terms throughout the session today, so we want to make sure that everyone fully understands the session and doesn't have to go away and then Google lots. So we want to make sure it's inclusive to everyone as possible. But I'm going to start off with a poll to get everyone in the room kind of getting involved. So the poll is, do you know what net zero, carbon neutral and offsetting mean? That will come up on your screen in a bit. So there's different answers. There's yes, and I'd say you know what all of them mean, and you'd kind of probably bet your life savings on that you know what they mean, or I think so, where you may know what some of them mean, but you wouldn't bet your life savings on it. Perfect, I can see the answers coming in. Mostly you may know 1 or 2 of them, but not all of the terms. You'll likely heard of them through the news or internal comms, but you may not know what they actually mean. And then lastly as well, you may not have heard of them at all. So we're still getting a few answers in, just got a few more seconds, and then we can share the answers with you. It's really interesting. I've never actually run a session where everyone is at the same starting point, which is absolutely fine. It's good that we can help different people across the spectrum of where they're starting from. So if we can end the poll, I don't know if you can see the answers yet, and potentially we can share them. You can see that there's a good range between people knowing what they mean and some people knowing they think they know, but a few that don't know what they mean. So it's really important we go through the terms for them, and for those that do know what it means, hopefully it's just a refresher for you and there's nothing crazy coming out of the woodwork and you know what they mean. Perfect. So thanks for taking part in our poll. So if we go on to the next slide, I'm going to start off with the 3 scopes. This is a very well-known image in this space, and it's the 3 different scopes that make up a business's carbon footprint. And it's all to do with the level of control that a business has over something to determine what scope that it falls into. So scope 1 and 2 are around emissions that you as a business control. Scope 1 is all around direct control that you have, and that's things like fueling company-owned vehicles or resources, so gas on your site, gas in like refrigerant gases which are used to top up air conditioning units. And scope 2 is around indirect control that you have as a business. So that's all around, and really the only thing in there is electricity that you use within your office buildings or on your sites. So that's scope 1 and 2 that you have control over as a business. And then scope 3 is everything else that makes your business run that isn't in scope 1 and 2. And it's anything that you have, the indirect emissions that you don't own, so you don't have control over. And you can see in the 2 purple arrows, there's lots of images, and there's 15 images to match up with the 15 categories, which there are in scope 3. And that's everything I've mentioned to make your company run. So all the purchase services and goods you buy, whether that be if you're a manufacturing business, the raw materials you buy, whether you are a professional based industry, that could be the laptops that your employees use, that's everything you buy. To your business travel, to your employee commuting, the investments that you make, so your employees' pensions, for example, it's everything else that your business has that makes it operate and run. And all of those 3 scopes together make up your carbon footprint. So on to the next slide, please. I will cover carbon neutral and net zero. So these are 2 very different terms in this space, and people can often get them confused and potentially use them unintentionally in the incorrect way, because if you have maybe some of you that you think you know the terms in that poll, a high level overview, they are both to do with measuring a footprint, and they do both have offsetting in them. So it is possible to get quite confused between them, but they are very different terms. So I'm going to go through them today. So carbon neutral is where you measure your carbon footprint, but there's no imposed scope. So out of the slide you've just seen with the arrows, you can pick and choose the different images of what makes up your carbon footprint. And that could be that you actually measure every single one of them, but you could also just measure one. There's no directive of what you have to measure. You then get a total from your calculations, and you offset those emissions and by buying offsets of the equivalent value, and you are then carbon neutral. There's 2 types of offsets, avoidance and removal, and you can use both for carbon neutral. Whereas net zero, you'd have to measure all of your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions and your material scope 3 emissions. So it's much more kind of robust on what you have to measure, and you know that people are reaching net zero, you kind of know what they're measuring. You then have to reduce your emissions to the absolute minimum amount possible, and then you can offset anything that's left via removal offsets only. So net zero is definitely the end goal. It's what we're focusing on in today's session. Carbon neutral is a term in this space. It is a good space to get to, but it's definitely a stepping stone on the way to net zero and not an end point in itself. But it is really commendable by being able to reach carbon neutral as well. So on to the next slide. There are 2 last jargon terms, which are the 2 different offsets. So there's 2 types, avoidance and removal. Avoidance offsets are when you pay into projects and they themselves don't remove carbon from the atmosphere, but they prevent more carbon being emitted. So one example, there's 3 on the screen, but one I can explain is cook stove projects. So you normally pay into a project that there's normally charities or organizations which help normally countries that in the developing world potentially that still use cook stoves, and they will replace them with more energy efficient cook stoves, so that by them using these cook stoves, less carbon is being emitted because they are more energy efficient, and renewable energy infrastructure as well is another example of avoidance offsets. Whereas removal offsets do exactly what they say on the tin. They directly remove carbon from the atmosphere. So there's examples of tree planting, very natural way to remove carbon, but also the 3 bullet points below that tree planting are all much more heavy machinery ways to remove carbon from the atmosphere. And it's normally big factories which suck carbon from the atmosphere and either store it in rocks really deep below the Earth's surface, or there's a new technology coming out as well where they're storing it in concrete. So they capture it and they store it and remove it from the atmosphere. And removal offsets are the ones that you can only use for net zero, and you can use both for carbon neutral. So that is a really quick whistle-stop tour of the 7 key terms. So I hopefully, as I say, that just reinforces what you already know. And if you didn't know, that gives you a bit more insight into what net zero is and the parameters around it. And really, the question is, why are we talking about net zero so much now? It's really exploded in recent years. It's becoming really in the forefront of business. It's becoming like all over the news. So if we go on to the next slide. Perfect. It is why now. So scientists across the world who all work together and also independently have said we really need to act pretty quickly, because they've been saying it for quite a long time. They're now saying it's urgent. We need to act really quickly to reduce emissions in the atmosphere to prevent really bad, catastrophic impacts of climate change and to keep the Earth as a place where humans can live. They're saying if there's no action at all, the Earth will not be able to sustain human life. So we do have other webinars which go much more into detail around the context of climate change, but yeah, keeping it as a high level, and it can sound quite dramatic keeping it at a high level, but we need to act now to secure our future and make sure that Earth can be a habitable place for humans to live on, which is where net zero comes in. As I mentioned, it's reducing those emissions, and that's what's needed to keep Earth as a space where humans can live. So because of that, pretty much nearly every country in the world has net zero targets, and the UK has its own net zero target, which is for the UK to reach net zero by 2050. And that's from central government. And of course, when central government does something, that really puts pressure and emphasis on kind of everyone else to follow suit. So it's really starting to create a snowball effect. What that's done is it's put pressure on local authorities to create their own net zero target, and also pretty much now it's in the 90% that nearly every local authority in the UK has their own net zero targets as well. And the snowball keeps on rolling, and that's putting pressure on large corporations. So they're operating in the boundaries of these local authorities, and it's putting pressure on them to also set and meet net zero targets. But also, large corporations have regulations and legislations they need to meet aside from net zero targets, so things around energy efficiency and efficiency of buildings, for example. So they're already looking at some parts of net zero themselves, and also they will be looking at climate risks as a business as well, just to secure themselves as a sustainable business into the future. Every industry has a really wide range of climate risks and different ways to address and mitigate it, but one kind of unified way is looking at net zero. It's bringing down the Earth's temperature, it's making supply chains more sustainable. So yeah, pretty much a lot of large corporations are looking at net zero. And the snowball has now really picked up speed and it's reached SMEs. So a lot of large corporations are now, well, previously they were looking at their scope 1 and 2 emissions, so they were the ones they have direct control over, and addressing that first. And now they're looking at their scope 3 emissions, and really particularly around their purchase services and goods, where a lot of their supply chain is, and that's usually made up of a lot of small businesses. So there's a lot of pressure on supply chains, whether that be tier 1, the snowball will keep rolling to tier 2 and tier 3, and it will soon encompass pretty much every business. Some stats to kind of put it into context. There's some large businesses that have specific targets for their supply chain. So for example, EY and Network Rail have targets for 75% of their suppliers to have set a science-based target by 2025. And a science-based target is one way of setting a net zero target. Unilever are prioritizing suppliers with science-based targets, and there's many more. You can put it into Google and you'll find a real wealth of organizations that are doing this. So that's why it's really coming to the forefront for small businesses now and businesses in general. And there's a few bullet points around consumer awareness, whether that be general consumers or if you're a business to business, that kind of procurement angle as well. So I've shared why kind of net zero is now at the forefront, and how it will reach some of you, but you're probably now thinking, God, I don't have time to do this. I don't have capacity. I now know that it's coming down the line, but what do I need to do? And it's probably you're thinking it's probably going to be quite a chore. But if we go on to the next slide, I have to admit, it's not the easiest thing to do, working towards net zero, but there are a whole range of benefits which you can see and realise through working towards net zero. So there's a list of them on the screen. The first one being it can boost your competitive advantage. So you can really stay relevant to your customers. I mentioned just 2 examples of large businesses that are putting this in their tendering and procurement process. So you'll be able to approach them and really be able to tick a box and meet their targets as well. So you can really stay relevant to them and boost the competitive advantage. You can also approach new businesses who probably have this as a target as well, and be able to really impress them that you're already on this journey and ahead of the curve for small businesses. You can attract and retain staff and recruitment leads. There are so many studies out there where employees want to work for businesses that align with their morals, that are not harming the environment, that are doing well for the environment. So you will be able to attract and retain staff. The most recent report I read, there was one which said around 75% of employees listed a business's commitment to the environment as a critical factor when deciding where to work. So they're really high percentages, which you'll miss out on recruiting those really talented staff if you're not able to demonstrate that you're doing this. Really briefly, getting ahead of regulations. When regulations come in, there's normally a really small window to get your ducks in a row to meet these deadlines. So you can really get prepared so that you're not kind of flapping around and having to pull quite a large thing together in a short space of time, because ultimately, although there's help around reaching net zero, it's not something you can do within a week or a month, for example. It is a longer term aspect that you need to be focusing on. Future-proofing your business, and also financial advantages. So winning new contracts, looking like insurance companies can look more favorably on you if you're looking at climate risk. You could also potentially get favorable loan policies. I've also recently seen a draft policy from a local authority where they're looking at how they can use business rates and council tax to really promote net zero as well. So you will also be able to see financial advantages through working to net zero. So hopefully you've seen that this is just not something else that you need to be doing, and it's a chore, that there are some business benefits through taking action and working towards net zero. And it really can align with your business priorities and elevate your business and be able to make you really competitive. But I'm now going to hand over to Fiona Clark, if we go on to the next slide, please, from David Miller Architects, who's really going to put this into context and bring it to life by going over their net zero journey and the benefits that they've seen as well. So I will hand over to Fiona.
Thank you very much, Laura. So I'd like to share with you our story, our net zero journey, and why it's made good business sense for us. So really putting some flesh on the bones of the theory that Laura has just shared with you. So just to introduce myself then, my name's Fiona Clark. I'm the Practice Director at David Miller Architects. We're a small team of 25 based in central London, and we work on a range of different types of buildings, so housing, schools, workspace, and increasingly lots of life science buildings, which is a bit of a boom sector post-pandemic. In terms of the context of how we got involved with Heart of the City, we originally joined the Responsible Business Programme back in 2018, and that was a fantastic experience for us, and we learned lots of practical sort of advice that we were able to apply to our practice to improve our responsible business credentials and weave that more cleverly into our overall business strategy. And so when we completed that foundation course, it was a really obvious decision to want to sort of carry on the relationship with Heart of the City, and so we've remained as an associate member of the course. And that's what led us then to have the opportunity to participate in the Climate Action Programme. So in effect, we've had the opportunity to kind of help on the piloting of the scheme, which has been super beneficial to us. And frankly, from having sort of made the progress that we've made, we've just never looked back. It was a very good decision to get involved. So next slide, please. So just to share a little bit of our motivation to want to get on this journey, then really it's sort of twofold. Firstly, it felt like the right thing to do, and I think most of us morally want to be doing our bit for the planet, as Laura said. And especially, with younger people coming into the practice, their priority is to work for a business that is acting responsibly. So we definitely wanted to sort of fulfil those kind of obligations. And then as architects, as you can see on the slide here, we're very lucky because we have a very direct opportunity to impact the environment. So we're, introducing renewable energy. You can see the PVs on the roofs. That's photovoltaic panels on the roofs of these buildings here, and also green roofs, which improve the thermal performance of buildings to keep our heating bills down. So that's something that we've always been on a mission to make our buildings environmentally friendly. And then, if you could go on to the next slide, please. In terms of our own operations, that's also been, sustainability has also been a real priority for us there as well. And so really from the early days around sort of 2011, we started to get our ducks in a row to make our approach more robust. So starting off getting ISO 14001 in place, making decisions to buy all of our energy from Ecotricity, who are essentially one of the few suppliers that solely invest and supply from renewable sources, and then really continuing to add to that, improving our recycling with people like First Mile. So really, I suppose what you could say is that sort of doing the right thing for the planet has been fairly much embedded in our practice for some time. So if we could have the next slide, please. So I just wanted to share this with you just to put into context the timeline of what we've been doing, but also to share that the second source of motivation, if you like, for getting on board with all of this is actually very tangible, and that is the business imperative to reduce carbon. And so what we were starting to see was that our clients were really making very clear commitments to wanting to tackle the climate emergency. And therefore what they were starting to do was put a much greater emphasis on that when we were receiving tenders and starting to bid for work. So for example, one of our clients is Westminster Council, and I know that many of the other local authorities are the same, but typically the sustainability questions would be worth 10% of the marks. So we could see that this was something that we had to really get our ducks in a row on. So in 2018, my colleague Jess, who you can see there, she joined our team, and she's really become our kind of eco champion. And working with Heart of the City during 2020, we were able to make some really good progress forwards to minimise our carbon footprint, which led us to become carbon neutral, which, as Laura said, is a really good stepping stone on the net zero journey. And so we became carbon neutral at the beginning of 2021, and that's set us on the right path since then. So if we can go on to the next slide, please. Again, echoing what Laura was saying, we then needed to get on board with measuring our scopes 1, 2 and 3 emissions, and that's where that sort of chimed with the opportunity to get involved with the climate action course with Heart of the City. And so that's been really, really helpful because we've been able to use all of the templates and the toolkits that the team have developed to allow us to measure the things that you see here on the screen, so energy, travel, and waste. And so that's really allowed us to have the basis to set our science-based targets and make the commitment to working to 2030 to be carbon to net zero carbon. So next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to just mention is that obviously in terms of doing all of this, it is that the last few years have been very challenging, and running a small business, as I'm sure you all know, is kept all of us very, very busy. So I think that really nowadays the driver, if you like, to become net zero and get on this journey is very much driven by the business imperative. And so I think that now, for me, looking back at our journey, the reason I'm really glad that we've had this opportunity is that it is giving us a competitive advantage. And some of the things that you can just see here on the screen on this slide are describing how we see the competitive advantage that it's given us. So, for example, I'd say the first thing is that demystifying all the jargon, as Laura described, it means that we actually understand what our clients are asking us about. And so that when we get the tenders, we can respond to them clearly and demonstrate that we've got our plans in place and that we understand their plans and how we can help them to meet their net zero goals. It also means that although we're not being asked to do this quite yet, that when the time comes, we will be able to report back to our clients to feed in our carbon information, to feed into their overall reporting, so that they can report and track their progress to net zero. The other thing that's been super helpful for us is because we've been sort of ahead of the game, if you like, on getting an understanding of net zero and working towards it. Then our clients have really appreciated us sharing our knowledge with them. So it's actually given us access to sit at a table, you know, with probably the big players. But as an SME, it's given us that opportunity, and obviously that's helped us raise our profile, which is always a good thing. So, so generally, all of that's good for business. And the bottom line is obviously we've been reducing our energy consumption, and that's saving us money as well. So and with margins being very precious at the moment, that's always a good thing. So if I kind of reflect on you know, why I think that being part of the programme at Heart of the City is a good thing, and I'm absolutely convinced that it is, then I would say that you know, first of all, it really takes the pain out of trying to figure any of this out on our own. We don't have people in our team who are set up to do this. So having all of this amazing support and collateral to help us is really valuable. The other thing I'd say is that you know, I know that the information and the templates and everything are absolutely rock solid. Because the people that Laura and Natalie have worked with to develop the programme are real experts in their field. So people like Martin Powell and Joe Goddard. So it's a really solid basis to start your journey with. I think it's also been really helpful because it's brought us into a network of other people like yourselves who are committed to this journey, and that's always good to kind of network and also share sort of queries and exchange ideas. So for example, when we measured our carbon footprint when everybody started working from home, we really thought we'd got something wrong, because suddenly the figures were going way up in comparison to when we were all based in the office. But actually, from digging around and talking to others, we realised that's because in the office we were buying all of our energy from renewable sources, and people weren't doing that at home. So it's a really useful network of people to be involved with. And finally, I'd say, you know, sometimes it can be a bit baffling, a bit overwhelming. There is a lot to take on board, but just knowing that you've got people like Laura and Natalie there to help you when you have those kind of deer in the headlamps kind of moment, and you really need some help from somebody, that the guys are always there to kind of support and point you in the right direction and keep your morale up to achieve the mission. So yeah, I really personally, I just can't see any reason why SMEs wouldn't want to do this programme. And if anybody would ever like to talk to me about more detail of our journey, I'm always very happy to do that as well. So back to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Fiona. It's a really useful presentation, as you say, to really put context and bring to life the business benefits that you've seen, and also demonstrate your journey, and that this is a journey. It's not a quick start and finish. It's something you'll work on, and as Fiona's demonstrated, you'll see benefits throughout the journey, not just when you reach the end. So thank you, Fiona. That's really useful for everyone to hear. So hopefully you're really motivated at this stage to get going. You know probably that net zero is the right thing to do, and also have understood some of the business benefits that you can see through it that Fiona shared as well. I've listed 5 tips to getting started. They're quite practical, very actionable, and relatively easy steps to take, because getting started is sometimes the hardest bit, just knowing where to start, what to look at, and what to get going with. So everything mentioned here is Heart of the City support, and Fiona's given a great glowing review, which is amazing. But that's also support from our toolkit that we have online, which Natalie will talk about more later. But it's designed so that you can start, as I mentioned, wherever you need support from, and it might not be from the beginning. As some of you have indicated, you already know some of the terms, so you'll be starting a bit further down the line. So the first tip might not be relevant for you, but you can still get use out of it. So the first tip is getting familiar with those jargon terms. We went through 7 today. There are so many in this space. I don't know why people keep creating more terms and making it more confusing, but every time they do, we update our jargon busting resource. So it now has over 50 terms on there. So there is basic terms that you need to know, like net zero and carbon neutral, but there also are more complex terms, and it explains what COP is and the IPCC, for example. So even if you know a lot of the basic terms, it may be something you want to look at those more advanced terms. We have our Take Action Now resource. It's a survey. It's a really useful resource to get started. It's a template survey that you can use, and it lists lots of changes that you can make, which are quick wins. So it's not something that you normally have to invest a lot of time and money into, so that you can really get going now and see some benefits straight away. It's really practical. You can print it out or use it on recycled paper, or use it on a device to walk around your site location or office, whatever it may be, and really tick and see what you're seeing and what could be changed. And it gives you practical advice as well on what you can change. Another thing to get started with is engaging your staff. Fiona mentioned Jess is their real champion in their business, who's kind of spearheading this work. There will normally be someone who's really passionate about this that you may not know about, who can drive the work forward within your business. And also by engaging people and making them aware of the issues of climate change or what you're doing in your business, you may be able to form groups which can carry certain elements of work forward. So it's really useful to engage your staff and bring them on the journey with you. It also can make it a lot easier for you when you're looking to implement changes or ask them for advice or to fill in surveys to get them to do that for you. Because if you just keep lumping them with surveys to fill in or asking them for information, it can be a bit hard to get people to do it. So engaging your staff right from the beginning can make this journey a lot smoother and easier for you to do. Attending lunch and learns. Heart of the City ourselves, we run loads of lunch and learns on lots of different topics, high level stuff like building the business case. We also have ones on electric vehicles, all the way through to strategies and how to measure your scope 3, for example. So there's so many lunch and learns out there, and lots of other organisations run free ones as well, so that you may look for more industry specific ones as well. But attend lunch and learns, they normally signpost to really useful resources, give really practical tips. So upskill yourself, upskill your employees. They're free. It will take about half an hour of your time to attend them, but they're really useful to get going and knowing where to start. And the last tip, of course, is sign up to Heart of the City's course. So as mentioned, we've designed a really practical course to help take you from the beginning all the way through to setting a net zero action plan. And we've taken most of the deer in the headlight moments out of it for you, because it's a sequential course and it builds up your confidence and knowledge throughout it. You'll still probably get some deer in the headlight moments going through it. But being part of a network and a course can really help you get going, and just signing up and having someone tell you kind of exactly what you need to do can really help you get going on your journey and really speed that up for you. So they are 5 tips to getting started, but I would also say my 6th tip is just get going. Even if it's learning one key term or just looking at, for example, Heart of the City's website, just do something, and then it will all start falling into place, because it is a complex space, especially if you're not working in it day to day. So you just kind of need to jump with both feet, dive head first, whatever the saying is, and get started and get going. But I'm now going to hand over to Natalie, who will talk to you in a lot more detail about our courses and how they can help you and how to get involved. So I will hand over to Natalie.
Great, thank you, Laura. We have just got a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I'll just cover those quickly now before moving on. One of them, will the slides be shared? And yes, they will. We'll be following up with an email and the slides for you. And then there's a question around scopes 1, 2 and 3, and are they widely used terms or Hearts of the City's way of explaining things? And just to confirm, they are widely used terms. They're greenhouse gas protocol defined terms, so it's the official way to do things, but you can read more about that in our jargon busting toolkit. So that's just a couple of questions, but if you have got more questions after the session, respond to the follow-up email, ask us anything, give us a call. We're more than happy to help. So we just move on to the next slide. I just want to tell you a little bit about the support that's available through Heart of the City. So on the next slide, I'll just tell you a little bit about our climate action course. As I say, it's been designed to be very practical, and it's specifically for SMEs, so more small and medium-sized businesses who probably haven't got a dedicated resource, haven't got much time to do this. So we have tried to make it as practical and simple as possible. And to do that, we've broken the course down into 4 modules. The first is jargon busting and demystification, which is what Laura and Fiona have both touched upon, that there's a lot of jargon out there. So we help you with there's lots more about the different scopes of emissions, what the key terms mean. So a great place to start. Module 2 is about building the business case. So it is really getting everyone in the business with you on this journey. So talking about the key business benefits, which Laura's talked about quite a bit already. Module 3 is the practical measuring your carbon footprint module. There are lots of different ways to measure your carbon footprint. There's lots of different calculators out there, but what we've tried to do is take some of the pain out of that process for you and have signposted you to really useful, simple, free tools that are out there. Lots of tips and guidance that we've learned from the other SMEs that we've worked with. Laura's also done a great job on developing lots of spreadsheet templates that you can use to help you measure your employee commute data, your working from home data. So lots of useful stuff in there. And then module 4 is all about, right, got your carbon footprint, what next? How do you set your net zero action plan and your reduction plan? So that's the modules. And then on the next slide, just to explain how that course works. So you can join at any module. So if you feel you're fine with the jargon, the business case, everyone's on board, and you want to get started at module 3, that's fine. Or you've got your first carbon footprint, but want to think a bit more about your net zero plan on module 4, it's designed to be flexible, and there's different start dates for module 3 and 4 throughout the year. Module 1 is designed to be self-learning. We have a learning platform, tons of resources, recordings of past events, lots of useful information, and the same for module 2. So you can work through that quite quickly, and Laura and I will have a sort of first meeting with you just to sort of really guide you and direct you as much as possible. But then module 3 and module 4 is, say, we have set intake dates for those. One 1st of April. Laura, I'm looking to you to nod your head. 1st of May. I know I was going to get that wrong. 1st of May is the next intake. So there's plenty of time for you to sign up now, work through module 1 and 2 and get started on the 1st of May for the module 3 intake. And the reason we have set intake for those modules is that it's more practical. You need a bit more hand holding. So we organise surgery session events that you can come along and meet some of the experts and talk to others and to help you on your journey with that. So the next slide, please. So included in that, you will have your sort of program manager that you can have meetings with. There's events, and it's all designed alongside our sort of toolkit as well, which you can use. But I think what Fiona's also mentioned, which is really helpful, is that actually sometimes it's the networking with other SMEs that's really useful. There's a lot of guidance and a lot of support out there, which is quite big business focused. But the beauty of sort of the Heart of the City network is it's lots of other small businesses that are in the same position as you. So you can share lots of good advice and tips. So on the next slide. So the toolkit that we keep talking about. So we developed this toolkit to sit alongside the course. So we use a lot of the resources within that, plus lots of extra sort of personalised sport and events. But the toolkit is also, that's free, and that sits on our website that anyone can download. And it's, again, it follows the modules, and I can talk you through what that looks like. In terms of the course, we actually have free places available at the moment, funded by the City of London Corporation, as they have their net zero targets that they're wanting to reach. So they want to support small businesses in the square mile to reach net zero. So we have free places on our course for SMEs based in the square mile, or with significant operations in the square mile, or perhaps in a City of London Corporation owned building. So they might be a tenant of the City of London Corporation. So lots of free places for city businesses. But we also do have some paid for places as well for businesses outside of the square mile, or not operating or in a City of London business. We stagger the price of our course costs based on size, and we try to keep it as low as possible, and all of that can be found on our website, and we'll be sending you links shortly. So that's the course, but you can obviously also access the toolkit. And if we just go to the next slide, I'll just show you some of the useful resources that you'll be able to find there. So Laura's mentioned some of these already: Jargon Busting, Climate Change 101, Carbon Equivalences, and lots of good case studies as well. Module 2, it's all about engaging your senior leaders. There's some stakeholder mapping, a survey you can send to your colleagues, and that Take Action Now survey that Laura mentioned, lots more as well. Module 3 on the next slide. This is where you start to get your carbon footprint measurement step-by-step guide, all the useful templates, baseline templates, more case studies. And module 4. This helps you to start having a conversation with your exec. What's your ambition? How are you going to go about this? How you write your action plan, and some useful organisations if you need some extra support. And the next slide. So sorry, just conscious that I've got about 30 seconds. So that was our climate course. Please do have a look online. We'll send you links, but you can sign up. As I say, free for city businesses, or there are paid for places. And also, please do make the most of the toolkit. We also have a Foundations for Responsible Business programme. So if you're interested in looking at the sort of wider remit of responsible business, we have a course that does look at environment, but also looks at your people. So things like D&I, wellbeing, mental health, and your community, about how you can best support your local community. So if you wanted a wider look at responsible business, please do also have a look at details on our responsible business programme. Again, we have some free places for small businesses based in certain London boroughs. That's Hackney, Islington, Camden, Southwark and Lambeth at the moment. We have funding for those places until the end of May, but there are also paid for places which again are staggered and subsidised as much as possible. So that is our programme. On to the next slide, please. So next steps, applications are open. Please join. I think Fiona and Laura covered really well the sort of business case for this. It isn't just a kind of nice thing to do anymore. There is a real business need, and it's a great way to win business and retain business. So please do apply and get started. If you want to chat with any of us to find out more about our course, our toolkit, our foundations programme, then let us know. That's the first step. Please do go away and download that climate toolkit. And the final slide is just some contact details of how to get in touch with us. As I say, we will be following up with an email. You'll have the slides and you have lots of useful links. So thank you very much for joining us. That was a little bit quick at the end, but thank you very much, Fiona. Thanks for joining us and sharing your net zero journey. And thanks, Laura, for sharing about the jargon and the top tips. And that's it. Thank you very much.